Hello and welcome to the RPG Blender, where we give lesser played games and forgotten settings the roll of the dice they deserve. I'm your host, Game Master George, and today I'll be giving you another themed list of non-Dungeons & Dragons games. But what topic will we cover today? Well, with the time I've been spending with the playtest of the upcoming Rupture RPG, I've been thinking a lot about interesting character creation. While there are a great many games whose creation amounts to pretty much just picking a class or a few options from a list of traits, I want to take some time today to look at a few alternate mechanics or concepts used by games to differentiate themselves from the stock standard. I feel breaking these mechanics out can help to immediately separate the game you're about to play from the ones that they're used to. We'll talk a bit about each of the 5 mechanics, then present 2 games which I feel do a good job illustrating the idea. Then we'll conclude with a final word of advice once we've covered the 5 ideas. And if any of these games sound interesting to you, you'll find affiliate links in the description. So maybe check them out, pick up a copy, you'll get a new RPG to play, and you'll help support the channel. Now, this is not meant to be a ranking of mechanics. Yes, there are some character creation concepts that get me immediately more excited than others, but the order that I'm presenting them here today is more meant to be a logical progression of ideas. Now, before we dive in, just a quick thank you to our sponsor, Rupture. Rupture is an upcoming tabletop RPG with an emphasis on character and story. Featuring an easy-to-use character background generation system, Rupture strives to help give role-playing newbies a ready-made backstory, and veterans get some interesting seeds to flesh out. You'll find enough crunch on the mechanics side to satisfy the gamer, while the actual play is well-focused for story-first gaming. If this sounds interesting, the Kickstarter will be launching on September 6th, or you can join their mailing list at www.rupturerpg.com. Now with that out of the way, let's break out the D5 with 5 interesting character creation concepts. Number 1. First up, we have a little tool for stat generation that helps to add more spice to the creation system than a simple dice roll, and it also helps scratch that Vegas itch. I am, of course, talking about playing cards. There are many different ways that you can get a random element into your character creation, but the most popular by far is, of course, math rocks. The thing is, each die roll only provides a single variable. This is, of course, usually sufficient, but the benefit with a card is that you get 2 variables being generated, allowing for more complex generation with a single card than you could get with a single die. See, each card has a suit and a value, giving you 2 elements which can be used in your character creation process. This can make for more robust statistics, or deeper tables of random effects. No, they don't make the wonderful click-clack sound of dice, but there is a different tactile pleasure of holding a hand of cards. Now, let's get some examples. First up, let's talk Deadlands Classic. This was the first game I ever played that used cards as part of the creation mechanic, and it really helped solidify them as something that I love as part of the creation process. Cards here are used to generate your traits, your attributes like strength, quickness, or cognition. So the way that the Deadlands Classic system works is by assigning a die type and a level to each trait. The die type determines what die you use when rolling that trait, and the level tells you how many to roll. And now this is where cards shine. The value of the card determines the die type, while the suit determines the level. So if you draw the Queen of Hearts, being a queen, you get a D10, and being a heart means it's level 3. Anytime you would roll that stat then, you would roll 3d10 and take the highest value. This helps make low value cards still slightly useful. Yes, a 2 is only going to get you a D4, but if you get the 2 of spades, then you're rolling 4d4. And since dice explode if you roll the maximum value, that means that you're likely to get an explosion on every single roll of that trait, meaning you're likely to regularly get above a 4. When using just a single die, you wouldn't be able to build this mechanic out. Each stat would require a minimum of 2 dice in order to generate this same value. Instead, you just deal everybody their hand of cards, and then they get to assign them to whatever stats they want. Much different, but somewhat more satisfying than just rolling dice over and over. Now, the second game that I'd like to discuss is Dragonlance Fifth Age. I'll be giving you another themed list of non-Dungeons & Dragons games. Now wait, I promise that isn't clickbait, so just Hear me out. Yes, Dragonlance is most commonly associated with Dungeons and Dragons. But did you know that in 1996, TSR put out Dragonlance Fifth Age using the Saga system? The Saga system utilizes a hand of 12 cards to generate your entire character. The creation process involves taking those 12 cards and assigning them to your personality, renown, status, and your abilities. But that's not all. The cards that you assign to your abilities also determine things like your weapon proficiency, what magic you can use, and your leadership ability. Variables of the playing card work to give you far more complexity with a single card than you would get with a single die roll. What takes 12 cards here would take over 20 rolls of the dice. That means keeping track of 20 different values and then assigning them as you go, rather than just taking those individual playing cards and putting them where they are assigned. I feel that is a far more effective way to handle this kind of character creation. Number 2. For our next concept, we're going to talk about something that's a little bit divisive. So we'll talk about why I think it helps more than hurts. This concept is character randomization. Personally, I love randomization in character creation. I believe it adds a huge entertainment factor when it's used to generate a character background. There's something magical that happens when you get a table full of ridiculous weirdos from that background generation. You end up with character flaws which create an amazing story, but which your players might not normally choose. Plus, it helps new players get a background which you, the game master, can then utilize to pull them more into the story. But backstory is only half of the game. Randomization also often, as was shown in the previous segment, plays into the mechanics of a character. This is where some of the opposition to randomization comes. It can be difficult as a game master to balance around a party where one player has rolled extremely well on their statistics and another is scraping the bottom of the barrel. And for the player, it can really feel terrible to feel like you're gimped from the very beginning because of these random dice rolls. This is why I recommend that you set a baseline of power. Establish a minimum modifier or point total that your players need to achieve through this randomization. Otherwise, they need to regenerate. The players will appreciate that leg up, and you'll have an easier time balancing your encounters. Meanwhile, this randomization will usually lead to characters with mechanical strengths and weaknesses, which leads to much more engaging gameplay than a fully kitted out party. So let's talk games. If you're looking for character creation with strong background randomization, take a look at Shadow of the Demon Lord. This game utilizes ancestry-specific tables, so a halfling will have different roles for their background than does a goblin or a clockwork. These roles are mostly filling out backstory and personality descriptors, but there are some mechanical effects which come with them. However, these effects are usually minor, or are balanced as alternate options rather than straight buffs or debuffs. After that, they also get randomized professions, equipments, and an interesting thing. While yes, those last bits can have greater impact on the play, they are all mitigated as the character grows. The effects of those roles are felt far more strongly at the start of the campaign, but they fade away as you gain classes and advanced features. This is one of the ways where you can enjoy the chaos of random tables without making the entire campaign a slog for those who are unlucky with their rolls. If you'd like to see this in action, you can check out our one-shot here from our actual play series, which includes the character creation process. Link here and in the description. Now let's talk about one that goes a completely different way when accommodating randomness. Dungeon Crawl Classics utilizes something that I find thoroughly entertaining, the Level 0 character funnel. This game has completely 100% randomized characters to start. On the surface, this seems to fly in the face of what I was talking about regarding the baseline of power. However, this character that you make is expected to die. Each player will make multiple of these Level 0 characters and bring them into that first dungeon. This is the character funnel, when many of these generated characters are expected to die horribly. These are, after all, normal people. The goal is, by the end of the funnel, that each player will have at least one character that survived, typically one who rolled decently in the randomization due to their increased aptitude and the player wanting to save their golden goose. And this character can then be brought to the coveted level 1 and begin a more standard progression. This funnel system balances out the randomization of the character generation with the pure number of characters that are being created. And as a GM, offing those extra characters can be somewhat satisfying without causing undue pain for your players. Now, before we move on to the next entry, I want to take a quick moment for an honorable mention here. That being, of course, for Rupture. Rupture focused on randomized character background generation utilizing cards and dice, and was specifically geared toward giving the game master more hooks to use on newer players. My players and I had a blast when we went through this process on stream, and it got them extremely excited to play the game. Now, I give this an honorable mention rather than one of the top 2 slots for 2 reasons. First, it's not available yet. It'll be coming to Kickstarter in September, but as of now, there's no way for you to actually go out and play it. And second, they're a sponsor. In the interest of making sure that you know my recommendations are not motivated by my wallet, it gets an honorable mention rather than a focus. But if you want to know more about the character creation process, you can check out the full tutorial here. Number 3. Moving on, we have a topic that has a similar idea to what we were just talking about, but with a good deal more control. We will be talking here about Lifepaths. Whereas the randomization we talked about before uses dice or cards to create a character, with a Lifepath system, you'll be creating your character by choosing jobs or other life events from a list of possible options. These choices give their skills, attributes, special abilities, or more. Now, the idea behind a life path could be compared to a class from Dungeons & Dragons, but in a smaller, more modular scale. They are effectively building blocks, which you fit together to chart out not just your character's statistics, but also a picture of the life this character has led. For someone who enjoys a crunchy system, finding just the right combination of paths to build the sheet you want is like a little puzzle minigame, challenging you to hit the ideal points. Meanwhile, someone who's more focused on the story of their character will find the idea of telling their story through the choosing of narrative life paths much more approachable than just assigning numbers to boxes. So let's see some examples. The first choice, and possibly most quintessential version of this concept, is Burning Wheel. With this system, each character will start by choosing what life path they were born into. There are different lists of the born paths for every species you could play as, with each species having a number of different environments you could have been born into. Then, once they choose their born path, it has a number of leads, the next life paths they could take based on their initial choice. This continues with each new life path adding a new list of life paths, which it could then grow into. This takes what would be an otherwise absurd number of options. There are nearly 300 different life paths just for humans, and organizes them into a nice flowchart of options. Comparing to good old D&D, rather than just choosing to be a fighter, you could choose to be a city-born squire who grew to become a soldier before enlisting in the city guard. Each step along that path then gives you adjustments to your scores. It also increases your age and gives you the opportunity to learn associated skills or traits. Once you have a number of them, based on how experienced the narrator wants the players to start, you have much of your sheet, as well as a good idea of who this person is. Where Burning Wheel is like carefully crafting a model, Traveler does its work by simulating the random nature of life. As with Burning Wheel, your players will choose careers, their life paths. Each career will give you opportunities to increase your statistics, or have events which might help your starting gear. However, these events are determined randomly, and some are not so nice. You might develop psychic powers, but you might also be arrested and need to spend the next term in the prisoner career. Each term you will test to see if you can get higher along your chosen career, or if you've reached the pinnacle of your possible achievement. And then, you can keep going, building out your traveler's history with a new career, leading up to the moment when they finally choose to break free of the career path and become a traveler. This way of doing things is a lot of fun, and it just adds a little twist of randomness to the character creation process, working in a little bit of the unpredictability of life, which doesn't play into the Burning Wheel life paths. This also makes it a great group Session 0 activity, getting together to laugh at the mishaps as each of them go through building out their character's life. Number 4. Next up, we have a concept which honestly should be a part of every character creation process, but is an absolute game changer when it's worked into the rules. This is the idea of collaboration. In most games, players each make their own characters in a sort of bubble. In Dungeons & Dragons, for instance, one player choosing to be a fighter doesn't really impact the choices that another player can make. Sure, the players can choose to balance out their roles, or the narrator could ask the players to connect to their characters, but that isn't the kind of collaboration that I'm talking about here. Instead, I'm talking about games where character creation is a group experience, where each player will make choices which will have a direct effect on other players. This could be as simple as a choice removing options from the pool of available choices, or straight up getting to define aspects of another character. Now, at first glance, this can seem off-putting. After all, getting to lovingly craft your character is something that a lot of players find to be one of their favorite aspects of an RPG. And believe me, I understand. I too have a large backlog of characters that I'll never get to play because I'm a forever DM. But when you let go of the reins just a little bit, you'll find that the characters you get are some of the most memorable you've ever played. Because suddenly their story isn't just something that lives in your head. It is one that the entire group came together to create, that everyone at the table had an effect on, and has at least some little bit of personal investment in. It really can change the game. Now, what games bring a strong showing in this regard? One that should be of no surprise to subscribers to this channel, and if that's not you, why not, is Paranoia. So remember when I was talking about getting a little bit of investment in other people's characters? Well, in this game, you get that link, and they immediately become your closest frenemy. Throughout the character creation process of the Mongoose release of Paranoia, you are taking skills which then prevents one player from taking them at all, and forces another player to get a negative in that skill. So each of your decisions needles two different players as you lock them out of one skill after another. Then, after you've loaded one player up with a bunch of negative skills, you have to give them your sheet and let them assign your attributes. Not only that though, at the beginning of the process, you will have decided on 3 personality traits for your character. That person who you've been cursing with negatives then gets to pick one of those traits and flip them to the opposite, drastically altering one of the core elements of your character. Needless to say, this helps build Paranoia's iconic semi-antagonistic party from before you've rolled even a single die. But now, let's say that the slightly competitive game isn't your style. Then allow me to introduce you to One Last Job. This game has a truly unique character creation process. In this, no player will create a single aspect of their own character. To start, the narrator, playing the boss as if talking to a room of co-conspirators working on a job, names one person who is absolutely vital to the success of the job. They give them a name, an implied profession, very important word, implied, and some kind of problem with them. That character will be the leader of the crew, and one of the players will then step up and claim that character as their own. That player will then add some kind of complication to the job, some hurdle that they know they're going to need to overcome, and present the next character, who should be one that is well suited to tackle that problem. Again, they give their name, implied profession, and some kind of personal problem. It continues like that until each player has a character, and then you start the job. That is only half of creation. As the job proceeds, each of your players will have opportunities to define additional attributes of the other characters. They do this by reminiscing about a point in time when that character was so much better at what they're supposed to be doing right now. That player can then choose to accept or reject the assigned trait, either accepting this bit of backstory and gaining a new trait, or denying it and not gaining any of the benefits. Through this process, the characters will not only be building out their sheets with various mechanical benefits, but they'll also be forming a tight web of interconnected history through those insulting anecdotes. And the fact that you can never define any about yourself, beautiful. Number 5. Finishing up this list, for now, is something which I have already talked about quite a bit on this channel, that being cooperative world building. One of the most important things, in my opinion, to impress upon a new player is the idea that the game you're playing in is a living world. Most often, people come to tabletop RPGs after video or board games. These types of games have, with very few exceptions, static worlds. The choices the player makes can impact the world, but only within predetermined guidelines. This is giving the player the illusion of control. Yes, them choosing the good guy option changed the story a little bit, but they were still just choosing between two different stories. In essence, this kind of game is a choose-your-own-adventure book with fancy graphics. So when these players then come to the tabletop scene, the newfound true freedom can be difficult to adjust to. Some may find it overwhelming, having a difficult time immersing themselves in a world once their multiple choice answers are gone, while others fall into the murder hobo trap, grasping the freedom but not the consequences. While we hear more about the latter, both of these are issues which a game master should try to help their players work through, and a great start to that is cooperative world building. The idea here is that while players are creating their characters, they will also be creating parts of the world. Veterans will of course be doing this through their background generation in any system, but I have a special fondness for games that include world building as part of the character creation. This helps to get your players invested in the world, demonstrating to them the truth of the living world, helping to immerse them in it and maybe even form some bonds. And from the perspective of a forever DM, it takes some of the pressure off of you when it comes to creating your world and hooks to reel your players in. When done right, incorporating world building into the character creation process will give you a number of world-related hooks which are important to your players. So, what games serve as a good example of this? First up, let's take a look at a less-known game, Beyond the Wall. At the surface, it isn't terribly unusual, a fantasy RPG focused on heroes from a small village. But that village is what forms the reason for its inclusion here. See, character creation utilizes playbooks to build out your characters with a similar system to the Lifepaths we looked at earlier, albeit without all of the branching paths. However, as you go through the playbook, some of the prompts will have your players creating NPCs or locations within their village. In doing so, they're building out their sheet with the various mechanical benefits, but are also filling out the communal village that the players grew up in. By the time creation is done, they will each have contributed 2 NPCs and 2 locations to the village. In addition, the game includes a sheet for your players to actually draw out your village, adding in the locations and people that they create along the way. This gives your players people that they care about, be they allies or rivals, and places important to their history. Now, the second game I'd like to take a look at here is actually a trilogy, this being the Kids on Bikes series of games. These games each have strong elements of world building through prompts given to the players. In Kids on Bikes, they will be creating a town full of rumors, points of interests, and historical legends. Teens in Space, meanwhile, will have them defining aspects of space travel or the galaxy as a whole. Finally, Kids on Brooms will have them creating a school of magic, similar to Hogwarts. In each game, players will be presented with a list of prompts, such as our town is famous for, a notable local landmark is, or our school sports team is called the. As the game master, I like to present enough prompts for each player to answer 3. This gives each player a chance to contribute a few significant events to the world, and to build out a bit of personal connection to their town. This also has the extra benefit of building out a full world, complete with hooks, which are immediately appealing to your players. After all, if they decided to add that detail to the town, it must be something that interests them, and you can know that once you add it as a hook, they will be quick to grab it. Now, before we conclude here, I would like to give an honorable mention to one game with regards to world building, Microscope. Microscope's base concept is communal world building. In fact, that's the entire game. The reason I don't give it one of these top slots is purely for that reason. The entire game is building the world. That can be great fun, but it's not a game for everybody. It is missing the character bits. Still, if you're interested in a pure world-building game, give it a look. So there we have it. 5 character creation concepts and 10, plus 2, games which I feel embody those ideas. Before you go though, I have one more bit of advice. It doesn't matter what game you play. All these ideas can easily be used in any game. Do you like the idea of cards for stat generation? Adapt it to your game of choice. Get your players to contribute to the world through bits of their backstory. Have them roll on life event charts to gain random small bonuses and personal history events. Study the techniques from these games, and then bring them to any game you choose. You can then turn your character creation process from a solo number crunching experience into an engaging group activity, which will help flesh out your game world and bind your players together. Thank you so much for taking the time to give this video a watch. If you enjoyed it, if it was helpful for you, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a like or a comment, or maybe subscribe. It really does help small channels like this to grow when you let us know if we're doing good work. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, or a game that you think could use a tutorial series, let us know. We want to make content that will be helpful for you. So let us know what you struggle with, and we'll find a way to tackle it. Meanwhile, if you'd like to pick up any of these games and maybe help support the channel in the process, consider picking them up from the links below. These are affiliate links which we may receive a commission from if used. Or if you feel like supporting us more directly, consider joining our Patreon. You'll have the opportunity to steer the direction of future videos and get access to our new patron-exclusive Rippers campaign. And of course, thank you again to the Rupture team for sponsoring this video. Anyway, thank you again, and remember, there's gaming outside the Forgotten Realms.